Well, wow. Wow. Sometimes a politician says something in this country and you're like, how do I even comment on this? So ridiculous. Like, it's just a case of what do you even say? It's when satire is cruelly and brutally bludgeoned to death. Now, let's have a little bit of context before we listen to Rishi Sunak's unbelievably wild intervention. So a little backdrop. In the late 1990s, we had, of course, the end of a 3-decade-long conflict, the Northern Ireland Troubles, in which around 3,500 people died. That was ended by the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Now, a key plank of this agreement was that even though there wasn't Irish reunification, there could be, though, if there was a referendum on the future status of the 6 counties, but nonetheless, the border between the north and south of Ireland would be open. This was critical. Those who regard themselves as Irish or nationalist or Republican could freely move around Ireland. Many of those Northern Irish citizens have themselves got Irish passports. Slight hiccup. Brexit comes along. Now, all of a sudden, that means the Republic remains within the European Union, including the single market and the customs union, but the North is now outside of the European Union. Now, that would mean, in theory, a hard border, because goods would have to be checked, you'd have customs checks, and thus the entire peace process, which was a huge achievement, which ended a terrible and violent, horrific conflict, that peace process would be destabilised. So you got this solution, which was negotiated by Theresa May, called the Northern Ireland Backstop, which would keep Northern Ireland some aspects of the single market until you got some other arrangement agreed between the EU and the UK. But also, that would mean de facto the whole UK would end in a form of customs union. It would be called a common customs territory or whatever, to stop customs controls between the Republic and the North. Now, you see, Northern Ireland did not feature in the referendum campaign, as you probably remember. Whoopsie daisy, as the expression goes. Now, Brexiteers went apeshit over all of this because, all of a sudden, what they were fighting for, they wanted to be, to have Britain free from the shackles, as they say, of a customs union, to forge free trade agreements with countries across the world, which turned out to be a load of absolute nonsense, which we've spoken about before, the reasons why. But, the only alternative was you get a border down the Irish Sea. So you'd have then, the UK could leave the customs union quite freely, you have a border down the Irish Sea, and then you keep Northern Ireland within a de facto single market and the customs union. Now, Brexiteers and the Tory right, they're supposed to be in the Conservative and Unionist Party. So Theresa May said that no British Prime Minister could agree to an Irish Sea border. And she was the leader of the Conservative Unionist Party. It would mean the end de facto of the union that exists with Northern Ireland. So Boris Johnson then went and negotiated a different deal, though. Now, people portrayed that as well. It's because, unlike Theresa May, who was weak and meek and didn't, bark at the EU enough, Boris Johnson came in and just bullied his way and got concessions. But that's not what happened. He just changed the red lines. And those red lines included a hard border, essentially a border down the Irish Sea, the very deal which Theresa May said no Prime Minister could ever agree. So instead you end up with this Northern Ireland Protocol, where the North is formally outside of the single market, but the EU's free movement of goods rules and EU customs unions are still in force. So you don't get customs checks between the North and the South. Goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland can't be moved without restrictions, though. So there's your customs border. So now the whole point, this obviously has caused major problems. It's become a big sticking point between the EU and the UK. And then you get this negotiated settlement between Rishi Sunak and the EU, which is the Windsor Framework. So now most goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland don't need customs or regulatory checks as long as they're certified as not being intended as the EU. So they might have to have a sticker, a label saying not for the EU. But you still get the EU law applying to some industries in Northern Ireland, and the European Court of Justice remains the arbiter of how it operates. You get the Stormont break, as it's called, Stormont being where you get devolved power in Northern Ireland, giving the Northern Ireland Assembly, which is what we're talking about with Stormont, a veto to stop any new EU legislation applying there. Frankly, though, the conditions attached to it and the retaliation from the EU, if it was used, suggests, a big question mark over whether it could actually be used. Right, have you got all of that? I think we needed just a bit of backdrop, that's all. Now, this is what Rishi Sunak has to say when he's selling the deal in about the Northern Ireland Windsor Agreement that's just been negotiated.
If we get the executive back up and running here, Northern Ireland is in the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, European continent, in having privileged access, not just to the UK home market, which is enormous, 5th biggest in the world, but also the European Union single market. Nobody else has that. No one. Only you guys, only here. And that is the prize. I can tell you, when I go around the world and talk to businesses, they know that. They're like, that's interesting. If you guys get this sorted, then we want to invest in Northern Ireland, because nowhere else does that exist. That's like the world's most exciting economic zone.
Hold on a minute. So, Northern Ireland, he says, is in the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, and having privileged access not just to the UK market, but also the EU single market. Nobody else has that. No one. Only you guys. Only here. That's what the UK had. That's what existed here before Brexit. It's just so ridiculous. It's just he's promoting a deal which is just what existed before for the whole of the UK. But Rishi Sunak campaigned for Brexit, so his whole shtick was that deal was unacceptable, that we needed to leave and abandon that deal. I mean, look, I'm a Eurosceptic for Remain. That was my position in the referendum. Got lots of problems with the EU in terms of how it shifted, enshrining neoliberalism in various institutions and all the rest of it. But the reason I just think this, particularly the Tory Brexit we've ended up with, a kind of hardcore Brexit, where we're not in the customs union, which is what we should have at the very least stayed in, because of these fictitious trade deals which add nothing to our GDP. And certainly don't compensate for the GDP lost. That's the economic growth lost because of the Tory Brexit. And we were told we had this oven-ready deal, but Boris Johnson was able to get away with that, wasn't he? He's able to get away with that because a pliant media allowed him to get away with it. It wasn't an oven-ready deal. It was a deal which clearly was a gibberish, which now has to be completely rectified. We've not seen a single benefit from Tory Brexit, the Tory hardcore Brexit that's been negotiated. None. Weaker economic growth, bureaucracy, red tape, all the rest of it. We've got loads of that, but none of the benefits. I mean, they claimed, control our borders, less immigration. Well, I think immigration is good for the country, but just factually speaking, we have more immigration than we did before. I'm happy with that, but that's not what they argued for. So even on their own terms, those so-called benefits. Now, this does show the Boris Johnson approach to negotiating, what a load of, which is just basically, and it doesn't work because the EU can't be seen to be humiliated, because that will then enable its rivals or other states that want to leave it think, well, if we just, scream a lot, we'll get our own way. The EU is much bigger than Britain. It has a stronger negotiating position. So this was agreed with a different approach than Boris Johnson attempted. But it just goes to show that actually this Tory Brexit is a disaster. It's a total disaster. And yeah, Northern Ireland, Rishi Sunak's right, does have now a much better deal than the rest of us. But what does that... I mean, he's literally condemned his own Brexit. That's the problem. This is the form of Brexit he wanted, he supported, he campaigned for, and he voted for. And now Northern Ireland's managed to escape it. And he's like, wait, great, good on them, eh? They're having a great time. Lucky old them. Woof. Ridiculous. What do you even say? Well, I'm sure we've got lots more to say about this, but I just thought it'd be worth just discussing it. Please like, subscribe, and do support us on patreon.com/OhJoesEvil. I'll see you in a bit.